Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of Change Chat. I am joined today by my very good friend, Jeff Moss. So, Jeff and I have known each other how long now, Jeff? Probably about two
2 years, I
years?
was going to say. Yeah.
And Jeff has retired from the YouTube space. So we're going to get into all that today. But at first, I want to take, for those of you who may be new, because my channel has grown a little bit over the past few months since Jeff left the space. And I want him to take a minute, introduce himself, and then we're just going to have a very good conversation. So we're just going to talk a little bit about his YouTube journey, what he was up to, why he decided to leave the space, and what he's been doing since, and kind of just see what we can catch up on. So this is the first time he and I have actually talked since he left YouTube. So, but Jeff, let me stop there, let you do an intro of yourself, talk a little bit about, kind of your journey.
Yeah, wow. Where to begin? Probably about 3 years ago. I'll just focus on my YouTube career. 3 years ago, I had a Pixel phone, and they had a feature where you could take a film and then immediately post it onto YouTube. And I'd been a YouTube consumer, I guess, since 2011. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I had been into e-ink for a long time, particularly e-readers, going back to 2007. But over the last year or two prior to starting my channel, I was really into e-note taking devices. I originally bought the Books Note Air, loved it. Eventually, kind of moved on to Supernote for about 3 years. Was my primary driver. Left Supernote, but still, like, so that's kind of where I was for a long time. And in that process of having this tech that allowed me to post on YouTube, and this interest of posting onto to doing e-ink stuff, it all just kind of came together, and I started my channel. I did it for about 2.5 years, and I posted my last video. This will actually be the first time I've been on YouTube since I posted my last video, which was, I think, January 2nd or something like that. And so for 2.5 years, just explored mainly e-ink devices, occasionally branched off a little bit, but for the most part, stuck to that core. And reviewed devices for the most part. I would do multi-series reviews. I would unbox the device, I would do a tour of it, and then I would give my thoughts on it. And that was the general formula I used. And then every once in a while, I'd just throw in different stuff. So that was basically the channel.
Yeah, and this brings up a funny point. So a lot of times on my commute, or if I'm going somewhere, I will put on a video in the background and just listen to the audio as I'm driving. And I actually was on my way to meet a friend to have lunch when you released that video. So imagine my shock of driving in the car and hearing you say goodbye to what you had done for the time that I'd known you. And I think you had a unique formula. And that's one of the questions, because recently there's been some conversation in the e-ink community, and I know you're out of it now, so you may not be as aware of some of it, but of people offering too much of an opinion, or, being too much, having more opinion than they are taking the time to dig into the devices. One thing about your videos is they were very intentional. So you had that 3-part series, which, as far as I know, is unique. I don't know that anybody's ever done it that way that I've seen. And where it was, okay, here's the device, here's the visual tour of it and what it actually does, and then here are my thoughts. All of that separated out into segments. What do you think? What are your thoughts on how much opinion, how much personal preference, those types of things should go into reviews? Because that's kind of the conversation that's happening. Some people think it should be all objective and you should only report on the details. Some people think you should be, kind of flamboyant and, out there. Where do you see that as being the best recipe, probably?
I got criticized at one point for not being objective. And I remember thinking about that criticism, and it's like, well, why? I don't know you can truly be objective. I come into it with my own perspective. I did try to take as neutral of an approach as possible, particularly with the unboxing and the tour video, because because that was part of my process of learning about a device. And so I thought, well, why not just post this and get views at the same time? But I'm just figuring out the device during this process, and then by the time I get to the review, then I've really, really gotten pretty deep into it, and that's why I did it that way. I don't. My overall thoughts. is that there's a lot of people online doing reviews of these devices. There are, and of course there's also, from YouTubers like us all the way to like professional, as it becomes more popular, you're saying places like PC Magazine or Tom's Hardware or whatever, those major tech sites covering this stuff as well. So there's plenty of content about the devices. So to me, the opinions are the interesting bit of it, right? That's the piece of it that we're adding value to the process. What is my perspective on this, which is very slanted based on my background. So I'm shocked. I'm surprised, I guess, by people kind of clamoring. And like to your point, I don't know who they are. I haven't been part of these conversations. But you can only be so objective, and I think the real value add for channels like ours is actually sharing our opinion about things. That's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's where I've kind of landed. I mean, I wrote a whole big article at one point on bias, just bias in general, because at one point it was, well, if you buy the tablet, you're not biased. Well, you are because you put your money into it. If you are given the tablet, you're not biased. Well, you are
Yeah.
a little bit because you've accepted something and not had to pay for it, so you're not invested. But as long as you acknowledge both of those biases out front, and as long as there's, in my case, not a string attached to you have to say X, then I think that those are comparable because I know that I have a bias towards Supernote because it's the only device I've ever bought. And I bought it because I believed so strongly after watching content creators that I should buy it. And I've used it for 5 years now, almost. That's coming up in a month and a half. So, that to me is a bias I know I have. So to me, it's not about trying to be objective. And to your point, I don't understand why you would watch a video if you weren't looking for an opinion.
Yeah, I think the bias that people needs to watch out for the most among tech, and this is something that's been more apparent to me over time, not just for e-ink, but just broadly speaking, is that in order to get views, the best way to get views as a content creator is to say something positive about the device you're reviewing. So the more you slant positive, because people want that confirmation bias, they want to basically feel good, right? You'll see a lot of these videos that are very kind of, I'll pick on Apple as a great example because Apple is a very large company, and so there's all sorts of YouTubers that are just constantly pumping out Apple news, Apple rumors, and that sort of thing. And it's always slanted very purposefully on being very positive. You might get little bits of critique here and there, but they're very minor because those folks know that to get the viewership that they want, they really need to slant positive. And so that's the bias as a viewer you need to be worried about. I think one of the reasons why my channel was successful is I wasn't aware of that bias going in, but I was an optimistic, or am an optimistic and kind of positive person, right? So I'm much like you reviewing these because there's this passion there, and I'm already kind of bought in. I've already drunk the Kool-Aid, if you will. And so for me, that was just natural. But it turns out it aligned perfectly with how the algorithms basically work and how viewership works. And so I did, relatively well as a result. But as a viewer, that's the bias I think you have to watch out for the most. It's just the over positivity because that's what gets views in the end.
Yeah, and I think also there's a fine line between your opinion and not qualifying it. So, for example, you and I both work in different fields. You work in the healthcare industry, I work in academics, and before that, I was in operations. So there were all kinds of, I come to it trying to do specific things. You came to it trying to do specific things. And as long as we're clear about that, and we recognize and hopefully say at some point, this may not be a problem you have. This may not be something you would enjoy. The digest on Supernote. Some people think it's a waste of time. For an academic, it's a dream. So it's like one of those things that I think, to your point, it's informed opinion and it's trying to never knowingly, in the argument I've been making lately, never knowingly mislead or never knowingly say something that's untrue. I don't know how to phrase it any better than that, but I think that's where the debates come up, that someone will be like, oh, well, that doesn't mirror the way I think, or a criticism I think should be valid, so therefore it shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a bit obtuse, but growing up, I read a lot of music criticism. And invariably, I grew to really resent it because I would be in favor of bands that wasn't the darling of the critics. I was a big Phil Collins fan, for example, and Genesis, and critics for the most part hated them. And so because of that, and I could mention other bands as well, I kind of grew to not have a lot of respect for criticism, at least in terms of popular media. And so as a result, so when I started applying criticism, I thought I didn't think that what I was saying was so important, but that the consistency that I would, the way I would deal with one device is the way I would deal with the other devices was more important. Because then as a viewer, you can go, well, this guy's full of crap on these things, A, B, and C. But I know how he, if he ranks a device on these axes, A, B, or C, I know what to think about it. And maybe it's aligned with what I'm saying, and maybe just do the opposite of what he's saying. It doesn't matter how you get there. I just wanted to be consistent, and then the viewer can make a decision based on that consistency. Now, I don't know how real that is. I don't know if people pay that close attention to my videos to be able to know that, to see that consistency, but that's how I approached it, and that was my philosophy around that.
I can tell you I did, because I think there's many a times in the comments where I would say, I completely follow your logic, but I don't agree on this point. And I think that's what made it so great, was the fact that you would say, here's what I'm saying and here's why. And I think as long as we give that why, I think it's something that people really value. Now, you're still going to have people in comments who are going to say snarky things, but I
Right.
don't think that's the majority. At least I haven't noticed it being the majority. And I've been doing this now, coming up on 3 years this winter. And I've noticed, yeah, there are going to be some people that are going to say something outrageous or something, crazy. But most part, no, I've never had to block, I think, but one person the entire time I've been doing this, because they were profane. That's the only reason I would ever delete a comment, is if it goes over the top and it's profane or something like that. But yeah, I appreciate that. I wanted to throw it to you, since you're not in the space right now, for one reason, because if you're in it, it's a little different, because you're having these conversations and you have all these things coming at you, and people being like, oh, well, how can you talk about that? Because you need to just report A, B, and C. Well, no, you can read a spec sheet for that,
Right.
you know?
Right. Totally.
Eh,
Yeah.
So
Why is it interesting unless you're offering that slant and that opinion? I don't see that. I never blocked. I want to touch on something you talked about, which is a bit of a tangent, but I reflected on this a lot. I never blocked anyone at all, even though there were occasionally trolls that were posting. I do feel like this is probably my personality, but although I think people can relate to this, boy, you just focus like a magnet on the more negative posts. And if I think of it objectively, though, like the vast majority of people watch your content and don't comment, right? So it's a very small subset that even comment. And then if you actually looked at the comments, at least in my case, but I think this is true for a lot of people, my YouTube experience, I think, was more typical than not. That's so I'll constantly use that as a reference point. Most of those posts are either neutral or positive, and then you get this small number of people who post negatively. And I think it's an incredibly tiny fraction. Most people that don't like my content move on. They don't post. So it takes a special person to post a negative comment, and I can't help it, but you zero in on, you focus on that, but the reality is they're so not representative of what's going on. People, they do what I do. Like when I see a video and I don't like it, I don't comment on it. Like, who has the time? You just say, oh, it's not for me, and you move on. And so anyway, I digress. I had to say something about that when you mentioned it, so I threw that out there.
no, and I appreciate that. And I'm very rare. I mean, there have been 2 times on YouTube where I've posted a negative comment, and they were both towards a certain channel that I felt was outright misrepresenting a product
Mm-hmm.
completely. And not only that, they were bashing viewers. And so I jumped into that fray for a minute. And that's it. I don't, to your point, what is, if it's a difference of opinion, why take the time to be hypercritical of something that could be perfectly valid to someone else? Only if it's something to me where it's, blatant. I think, than and I do think they're the minority, but they get a lot of press. So they get a lot of traction sometimes if other people see a negative comment and pile on. But it's a blip.
Yeah, and I wanna be clear too, like, I'm not above this personally either, I'm just reflecting right now. There was a video I watched, I think yesterday, and it was a Charlie Rose interview, and it was Charlie Rose interviewing John Mearsheimer, and this is all, of course, about what's happening in Iran and what have you, in Ukraine, and, because he's a political realist, John Mearsheimer from University of Chicago. Anyway, I usually find John to be a really good interview, but Charlie Rose was doing what Charlie Rose does, which is he interjects from time to time. And I think just I don't mean to be cruel, but I think he's getting up there in age and he doesn't understand when to strategically interject. He just maybe feels like I should be interjecting. And so there were literally times in the interview where Mearsheimer was basically in the process of answering his question, and then he would interject when you knew if you don't say anything, he's going to get right there. He's like right on the cusp of answering that. And I ended up posting. And now I look back and saying like, this was a great interview, but he shouldn't have interrupted as much. And now I'm like, what did I accomplish? Like, why did I post that? You know what I mean? So even I personally have posted negatively and it didn't, well, I don't know why I did it. I guess there's something human nature about it, but it didn't add any value. Yeah, anyway. I just wanted to be forthright.
Well, and I do think it can from time to time. I mean, again, if you're being constructive, I mean, but yeah, I
Yeah.
would assume since it's Charlie Rose, there are thousands of comments on the
That's the
video.
other thing. I didn't read the other comments, which I know is also a frustration as a creator because you get a comment and you're like, thanks, 20 people just said that, but okay, your 21st is really magical. And I ended up going back and reading comments and it's like, yeah, everything I had said, everyone had said already. And so I literally had no, I don't know why I posted that. But anyway,
So yeah, absolutely. So let's jump back for a minute because I didn't mean to get us on such a tangent about that, but that was a current topic of discussion that I wanted to get your perspective on. But one thing I do want to talk about is, you've walked us through how you dealt with when you got a device, what you did with it and what your process was. But maybe a little bit more of why you picked this specific niche to start talking about it and what your goal was when you started out on your channel. What were you trying to accomplish? I mean, I know a little bit of this because I watched your channel for that amount of time,
yeah.
but kind of when did it become more than, hey, this is kind of a little bit of a fun hobby or a little bit of a thing that I'm doing? And what was your kind of vision for what you would like the channel to be?
Well, I think so the two bits we talked about already, which is I had this Pixel phone, so suddenly technologically, I didn't need to go out and buy a bunch of gear, at least to start off with, was a big deal. And then my growing passion of e-ink was also a big deal. I think the third piece of that triangle would have been probably my deep guide. So that channel was something I'd been watching a lot. Voya's review of the Supernote in particular was something that he was one of the few voices talking about because they had just gone through an update with the Supernote platform, a software update, which dramatically improved the performance of the device. So he was doing an update on that. And that's what got me attracted to that to begin with. And I'd watched a number of his other videos too, and to a lesser degree around, I think Kit was about that time too. And I don't mean this in like a demeaning kind of way, but I mean, I literally said, well, I can do that too. Because, he was doing talking head videos, right? So it was just pretty much a stationary camera, maybe some shots of the device. But, I just thought, well, that's the barriers are low. I can totally do it. I've got the passion, I've got the tech, at least to start off with. And I think all that culminated in me doing it. And the fact that it was a niche that most people didn't care about only helped because I felt like there was room for more voices and a need too, honestly. As much as Voy was inspirational, there's quirky things about him that I didn't care for, and they're not worth going over because this is my opinion versus his and all that. But I just thought there was an opportunity for more perspectives. And so all those things coming together is kind of what got me going. And then as things happen, I started getting more serious. It's like, okay, let's get serious. Let's buy a camera. Let's focus on production, software. I think I first started working with Power Director, I think, Cyberlink Power Director. I might have that wrong. And then probably toward like the last year, I moved on to Final Cut Pro. And then I started off when I moved from my phone as the camera, I moved to like a Sony like ZV-1. I might have that wrong, but something like that, which is great. But then that graduated to a Lumix camera. And then all the while, I'm also developing the lighting and the sound, which I never quite figured out. Like I got better at lighting and sound, but I never mastered lighting and sound quite as well as I mastered the camera. Mastered's a strong word. I don't want to say I mastered it, but I was competent in it. Let's just put it like that. So, it just evolved and developed. And as I'm going along, it's getting more interesting, right? Because you get the attraction, particularly of companies that are smaller and are trying to get a foothold. So they're willing to work with a small creator. So BigMe was the first company that I started to kind of work with a little bit. That ended tragically, but it was promising in the beginning. And then Viwoods was another one that I connected with early on and was really happy to support. So, and then all that kind of built it on itself. And my passion still hasn't changed for e-ink. I still use e-ink. I have 4 ink devices I use on a regular basis. Believe it or not, I can't believe that, but that's true. But the process became more work than fun toward the end. And it was just, and I'll tell you, like, I'm vaguely aware of the market now. I really have walked away for the most part, but I did notice that like Books has got the Books Go 2 or 10.32 and a lit and non-lit version of it. And dude, all the negative things are coming to the forefront. The negative things about ordering it, but other reviewers getting a chance to review it earlier just because they're, in have a tighter relationship with books. I never had a relationship with books. And that frustration of just getting the device, right? Because you're trying to get a video out as quickly as possible, that unboxing video. And like invariably they would use UPS, which is the worst service. I love DHL. DHL was the best. DHL would require a signature and they say, screw it. We're just going to drop it on your porch and leave. I love DHL. But UPS is the worst. It can be the worst. And FedEx is kind of in the middle. So all the drama and stress, which a lot was self-imposed. To be honest, I've learned so much in the death of my channel and what's happened afterwards about what actually mattered versus what I thought mattered. And so at the time I was doing the channel, I thought it mattered, the timeliness, getting these videos out fairly quickly. And it did, but not as much as I originally thought. Also, I'm going on a tangent here, but
Oh,
also
no, you're good.
I made it a point to produce videos every week. I didn't need to do that. Like that part of it, I made harder on myself because it's not the weekly content that mattered. It was people just cared about the new devices coming out. What were they like and what were my thoughts on it? That's all people cared about. So I could have done nothing and just waited for new devices to come out. And anyway, I digress. I don't even remember the original question. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, this is what this is supposed to be. This is supposed to be a conversation. I
Yeah.
deliberately didn't want to script a bunch of stuff because I want people to get to know you. And this is a messy process. I mean, to be honest, I've told you and I've told other people that, and when you quit or when you retired, I'm going to say you retired from YouTube because you didn't really quit. I loved the way you did it, by the way, the glass of wine it was just such a fun way to say goodbye.
Thank you.
But, and I would encourage everybody, it'll be down in the description, but you should go watch the video because Jeff goes through in detail the journey and it's just really fun to watch. And of course, upsetting at the time and the fact that a good friend of mine was leaving the space. But at the same time, it was a master class in how to gracefully do so. And how to have a little bit of levity, a little bit of introspection, a lot of introspection of why. And I just think that was fun. And I've told you for a long time that if it's ever more work than fun to me, I'm probably going to hang it up because I have a full-time job. I do other things. I have a family. Right now, I'm still able to balance. But if it ever becomes to that point to where I'm stressing so much over the next video and when to get it out and how to get it out and, and I just don't have time and other things begin to suffer, I think that I would probably say, you know what? I'm a net zero on this. I can pack it up and there's no harm, no foul, and I'm good. But one thing you did say that I found really uh, intriguing that seems to have flipped a little bit. Right now, the Go 10.3 that you just mentioned, of course, the naming convention, it's the 10.3 Gen 2 and the 10.3 Gen 2 Lumi. So I wrote a whole article on the idea that they're drawing on the nostalgia for the 10.3, so they don't want to let go of that. And that's why they're keeping that name. And they're drawing on the Max Lumi. I went like meta on this, Jeff.
Yeah.
They're drawing
Yeah.
on the Max Lumi, which was a very popular tablet for them, as the names to try to keep people and bring them along. But reviewers are not getting them early. So they've flipped that lens. So for example, I'm still waiting on mine, Kit's still waiting on his, a bunch of reviewers are waiting, whereas people are going out and buying them and getting first out with some of these early reviews. And I think that's frustrating from my end, but
Yeah.
also I think good because it can get some different voices maybe into the market at a different point in time. We got the press release kit and all of that and put that information out there. But then now you have people who are actually testing the device before we even see it.
Yeah, I believe too, that's the way the the corporations want it. So, and I get that. When you're relying on a small group of people on YouTube to kind of get attention for your product, and most reviewers in this space, in my opinion, are relatively objective, meaning that obviously they have their perspectives and their biases, but they'll tell you what they feel about a device. They're not as rah as say a lot of these Apple channels are referred to kind of earlier. So there's a chance that you're going to release, like a Books is going to release a device, and then you're going to get attacked a little bit on it for some aspect of it. And I think that's a huge risk. And so if you're Books, so if you're a growing company, you want those voices because you've got the big channels are going to ignore you. So your only chance of press is kind of what was our level of videos. But I think that if they had their druthers, you want to control, and Remarkable is beautiful at this. Remarkable nailed this, particularly with their last device, which was the Move, is they curated who was going to get access to that and who was going to talk about the device. Now, I don't mean that the people that reviewed the Move device were like, reading the talking points that Remarkable gave them. No, I think they were doing exactly what they would have done no matter what. It's just that they are inherently positive to so Remarkable knew we can get the message out with these outlets that are going to be positive toward us. And other companies do this too. So that's what you want. You want to control the narrative of your product going out. And so Books might be getting to that point where they realize we can get to outlets that are less risky, that can get the message out, and they would prefer that over the more riskier kind of YouTube influencer place, which is a little more volatile potentially. I can definitely understand that from a business perspective.
Yeah, and that's one thing too that I want to ask you about because, the question that you tangent off a little bit was about vision. And one thing you did that I think was very unique in the space again, because first of all, your 3 video series I think was unique, but also you would do these market analysis videos that nobody else really did. I mean, yes, I would talk about what I saw as a strategic objective set for a company, whether it be Supernote or Books or things I would like to see from a strategic perspective. But I never did what you did, which were like these market analysis type discussions going through with charts and what's e-ink doing and what are the company metrics. What led you to do that? Because I really haven't seen anyone else kind of pick up that mantle or start to deep dive into, that reality. I mean, this is a business that's largely private. There's not a lot of public information available, so there's like this shroud of secrecy in some cases over how it works.
Yeah, that's totally right. Let me kind of take that going back. The most companies are not publicly traded, and the ones that are so large. I think of an Amazon. that's so large that their Kindle division is folded into their numbers, and so you don't know anything about them. And E-Ink Corporation is very secretive about like who their top, who they're selling to in the manufacturing space. So there's not a lot of information. You really have to kind of be creative about pulling it. For example, I would go into the US version of Amazon and just look at the sales because most companies sell on Amazon. Not all, but most sell there. And you can get a sense of how they're doing in theory. It's flawed because it's, again, very biased. It's from that perspective, that one marketplace. It's missing direct sales, which are huge for some of these companies. But you can get a relative feel for whether the brand recognition is stronger versus where it's weaker. To your question about why do I do that or why did I do that? My background is in business and accounting, and I have an MBA. So I'm professionally trained to do kind of strategic analysis and enjoy that. Much of my career has been in analytics, not lately, but historically in the beginning. So for me, no one else was doing it. And it was kind of interesting putting it all together because you have to kind of pull, I would use like creative things. Like I would not just like using the Amazon sales, but what are the Reddit viewership numbers? Things that don't tell you the answer, but it kind of suggests the answer because it's all you've got. And that's just something I really enjoyed doing, and I'm always kind of curious, like, are these things becoming more popular now, or are they stagnant, or how these players kind of, match up with each other in terms of scope. And so it's kind of fun to piece that puzzle together. I mean, I don't know if I got it right, because there's so much information you don't know. There's such what they say in like strategic games or in war, the, is it cloud of war? What's that phrase I'm trying to think of?
Fog of war.
Fog of war, yes. So there's a massive fog of war in what's going on in the industry, and even the statements from E-Ink are totally unreliable. I wish I could remember off the top of my head some specific examples. I'll be somewhat obtuse about it because my memory's just not that great. But well, first off, they're translated from Japanese to English. You might lose some stuff there. But also they would make statements like about what they're focusing on, and then they would give you no clue as to what was about to happen or whatever. Like they were very cagey in terms of the broad strokes were there, but the detail, you couldn't look at the details and know what was going to happen over the next 6 months, from their annual report, because it was more backwards focused, or where they were currently at as opposed to where they were going. So anyway, so there's not a lot of information to go on. I was really interested in it, and so I just kind of cobbled together what I could and then threw out some analyses around that. It's probably wrong. Most of my stuff I said was probably wrong, but at least at a high level, I mean, certainly it was interesting and directionally probably correct, but not in the details.
I think if nothing else, even if some of your predictions were off or some of your conclusions were off, it's because you didn't have all the data. And that's important for people to know, that all the data is not available, because we get in this mindset where everyone thinks, well, you should be able to just go look that up because we live in an internet age. But that's not how the internet works. That's not how information works. You draw on the sources that are available, and then you make educated guesses and assumptions based on those sources. And then if you're lucky enough to get provided information, you vet that and to the best of your ability. And when you can't, you say so. And there's a lot I've learned just in conversations with companies that in some cases, 3 or 4 of these companies have the same exact manufacturer. So they're sourcing it from a certain manufacturer, and they're selling the product under a different name.
Yeah, a great example of that lately has been with E-Ink frames, and I'm trying to remember. I think it's Blooming 8 and Inkjoy. The packaging is exactly identical except for the logo on the box. It is so clear it's coming from the same factory, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But it is interesting to see that these companies working with Chinese manufacturers, these manufacturers have multiple contracts with different entities, and that was kind of an obvious one just on the packaging.
Well, that's a perfect segue into e-ink frames, because you were I think you were the first. You and Vlad were like right together on that, but I think you were the first to talk about an e-ink frame. And actually, you know, it became a passion near the end of your channel where you
Yes.
were talking a lot about them. And I have one. I have the Alluratech. They were kind enough to send me one. And Vlad and I recently did an episode where we sat down with the company. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you've had time to
I
see
saw I
that,
saw
but
bits of that.
and it was interesting to hear how they pivoted and, why they picked the right time, and we were lucky enough to sit down with their head of product and their CEOs, and they were both co-founders, so it was a really fun conversation, and, it wasn't sponsored or anything. They just reached out and said, "Hey, can we have a conversation?" And I said, "Sure, let's do that." And but you were one of the first, one of the leaders on this, and you and I have completely different use cases for it. So I'd kind of like you to explain first why this was so interesting to you and what made you really kind of catch the bug. Because I mean, you there for a while, I was worried about you. I thought you were going to buy that big 32, what was it, 32-inch frame. I
I
thought, what is Jeff's family going to think about this if he goes out and drops this?
Wow. Are you talking about like the ink poster, the Pintafora or whatever that they
Yeah, the
produced?
last one you talked about, and in the video you go, I'm not going to buy this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I don't know why, but I've always so e-ink is great for reading and writing. Reading we know from e-readers, and writing we know from these devices that we both do channel or I did channels on, and you currently do channel on. But it always seemed to me that it would be great for art. And you saw a lot of people like on Reddit would post projects that they would do, particularly in black and white. Usually it was like trying to create like a smart home monitor, like here's the weather, and that type of thing. Or here's a newspaper, that's cobbled from the internet. So the concept of having a display device for e-ink was always kind of floating out there and always of interest to me. About 2 years ago, roughly, Big Me released a Kaleido 3 monitor and an all-in-one PC. And I ended up buying the all-in-one PC, and my thought process at that time was to just mount it on the wall and use it as an art display, oddly enough. It turns out that was totally impractical, and I won't go into the details of that. It was probably my biggest regret in terms of purchasing. But then Vlad was the first. He went to CES a year and a half ago, and that's where Ink Poster had their display. And the minute he posted that video, I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I'm really into. And I've been into it since. Let's just put it like that. So I have e-ink frames. I have a Luratech as well. I have a reflection frame. Reflection frame was the first to come out. I have Blooming 8. I have a number of Blooming 8s. I have Inkjoy that's on the way. I haven't gotten it yet. I feel like and I have an ink poster as well. So I have 4 of these currently. I'll have a fifth one soon. And I just love it. I love the idea of being able to have art on the wall that you can change. And not everything that you put on these things looks great, but a lot of stuff looks great. A lot of stuff looks great, particularly classic art pictures, AI generated pictures. And some black and white photos in particular look great. Color photos can be hit or miss, usually not great, but sometimes they're okay. The battery life is unbelievable. Like, I have a reflection frame. Again, that was the first one I ever bought, and it still shows a full bar. It's been almost a year since I've had that. Now, I'm not changing that image a lot. I'm usually changing, once every month or so, but everything about it is just super cool. And that's why I got into it. So yeah, no, I've got like, how many do I have? So at home, I'm looking right beyond my MacBook. I've got a small Blooming 8 frame in my room here. In the bedroom, there's the ink poster. The Luratech and 2 other Blooming 8s are hanging in my living area. And then I've got the reflection frame at my office. So 6 devices currently mounted on my home. And I don't regret buying any of them. If I regretted one, it might be the ink poster, because it's more expensive, and I think Blooming 8 does it better with less. Although Ink Poster has a nice curated art gallery, so I do appreciate that. But yeah, I love them.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned photographs, and that's what we use ours for, our Alluratech, and that's what they kind of target it towards. And I actually had this
Yes.
conversation with them, but one thing that I've noticed is that older photographs that have been scanned in actually seem to look better on the frame than current or like modern digital photographs,
Yeah, that makes
if that
sense.
makes sense. I
It
mean,
does.
it's like I have a photograph from what would that be? The late 70s, early 80s of my mother. That's a beautiful photograph. And when I put it up on that photo frame, it's stunning. I mean, it looks really, really good. And then if I take a current digital photo and put it up there, and I don't know if it's pixel density, I don't know if it's, I don't know why they look so different, but if something was on film and you capture that photograph, it seems to do better. And I'm not a photographer, so to me, I can't explain why that is,
Yeah.
but it just seems like, to your point, it's hit or miss, but if you get it right, it's stunning. And unless you're up pixel peeping on it, you can't tell that it's not a photograph.
Yeah. The fact that I'm focusing on it in particular around art pieces, I think people want photos. I think a company like Allurtech is really smart to focus on that. And you see other companies do that too. Inkjoy is another company where if you look at their materials, it's mostly photographs. And then occasionally they'll do an art piece. And that's what people generally want. I'm not typical. I ended up getting blooming eights for a couple of my folks in the office and reflection frames for my parents. So that's what we gave in holiday gifts, this past year. And that's immediately what they focused on were photographs. So I'm atypical in terms of I just want to focus on art.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I like the art pieces that I've put on there to test out and everything look really well. What we've done here, and the battery life, to your point, is amazing because we've had this Allurtech frame since, trying to think how long we've had it now. We've probably had it at least 6 months, maybe even longer, and we change it daily. So we have every morning it cycles a new photograph on the wall, and we've not yet had to charge it. Now, I haven't checked the battery here lately, but we haven't had to charge it. And every day there's a new photo up there, family photo throughout the years. And the only problem with it, which they're talking about solving, is the 10 picture limit
Mm-hmm.
in the app. And so you can set 10. So every, 10 days, we just change that out for the next 10 days. But it would be nice to be able to schedule that out further, have a little bit more memory. And they've even talked about adding an art gallery piece so that you could, have kind of a curated experience, not quite to the level, I think, of Ink Poster. I mean, Ink Poster is selling for art. And I think that that's
Yes.
their specific, this is who we sell to.
Yeah, I think in particular, I don't know. I could be wrong on this point, but I think they're selling to hotels ultimately, because especially with their more higher end ink frames, which I have not purchased. I did purchase a 27-inch blooming 8 though, so that was expensive, but I'm looking forward to that size in a particular place in my house. Other companies like Blooming, I'm really a huge fan of Blooming 8. And I can say positive things on all of them. But Blooming 8 has, it is, you can do playlists. I actually have in the frame that's behind me, I have 2 playlists going. So in the morning, that's a series of kind of general AI images I've created. And then I've created this series of images of dragons. I'm kind of into dragons, and those are at night. So I'm changing twice a day with the Blooming 8, and it's unlimited. I don't think there's a limit on how many images you can have in a playlist. I could be wrong on that, but it's a lot.
It's really cool. And you
Yeah.
mentioned dragons. My son Gabriel's big into dragons. It's like his favorite thing. And then of course you do Lego and Transformers and stuff. And my youngest son Corey is very big into all of that. So, and of course I was a huge Transformers fan. So, which leads me to the biggest question. And
Yeah.
we'll go to some other things too. But the biggest question: how did you grow up as we did? Because I think we're roughly the same age. I don't know exactly, but I think we're around the same time period. How did you not see the Transformers animated movie? Have you still never seen it?
Yeah, I've seen a comic book I've read a comic book adaptation of it, and I've seen clips of the movie. So To your point, I was super into Transformers, particularly in 1984 and 1985. That's when they launched in 84 and 85. And I was still into Transformers beyond then a little bit, but it was a very transitional time for me. You're moving into, at some point in there, I was moving into junior high and I was kind of aging out a little bit. I was still into comic books and that type of thing, but not so much the cartoons. And so I think the timing was just off. And also my friends would tell me they were kind of still into it and watching it, and they would tell me about the movie, and I just didn't. I don't know. I never wanted to watch it. Even though I became a huge fan of Rodimus Prime. I think he's the better Autobot lead. Now, not because of the movie, because I never saw the movie. I just saw the descriptions on the back of the toy boxes, with the stats on the side, and I just thought Rodimus was like this veteran, grizzled veteran leader, and I was tired of Optimus at that point. So for me, it was a
Yeah.
breath of fresh air. And I liked his trailer better because it was more compact. It had those cannons in it. Anyway, I don't want to go too deep into this, but yeah, I think it's this bad timing. If that movie had come out in 84 or in 85, I would have been there, but it was just a little too late for me.
Yeah, and it's funny because I would always joke with you occasionally when you'd say Rodimus Prime was your favorite because he was like, I stopped watching the cartoon. I mean, I was starting to age out anyway as well, but it was like I had been so invested in the series up until the movie that this was I had to go see it. And then when I saw who was voice acting in it on top of that, because Unicron was Orson Welles,
Yeah.
Leonard Nimoy was Galvatron, I mean, you had these huge voice names in there, Robert Stack. I mean, it was Judd Nelson. I mean, it was crazy. The voice cast in that movie for the time period was just really, really cool. And then, of course, you had Frank Welker and the normal voices alongside them. But to watch, it's 40 years out. If you haven't seen it by now, I'm not going to worry about spoilers. But,
Yeah, yeah, no, no
but to
worries.
watch it, to watch, I'm talking about for people watching too. But if you don't want to hear the spoiler, press pause. But to watch Optimus Prime die on the big screen was a shock. Nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
Nobody. The theater was just gasps. And you thought, surely they're going to bring him back. And I guess eventually they did in the cartoons or something. But at the time, and most of us hated Rodimus for that reason, because he's the reason Prime dies before he becomes Rodimus Prime. So
Yes.
it was like this whole weird, convoluted, and it's still one of my favorite animated movies. I mean, occasionally the kids and I will watch it on I watched it with Trey and Eddie for the 20th anniversary, and we've watched it with Corey and Gabriel, and it's a really well done period movie cartoon. Yeah, I wouldn't put it on the level of like Secret of Nim, if you remember the Secret of Nim
Sure.
from
Sure.
when we were younger, because that was a very gritty, Don Bluth has a way to tell a story. But so I wouldn't put it on that level by any stretch. But if you were a fan of the series, it was well done. And the voices are just what did it. I mean, Orson Welles' Unicron was terrifying.
I will say though that the knock on Transformers, which as a kid you don't care about, is that it's a cartoon that was made to sell toys. And that's fine. As a kid, like, yeah, give me the toys, I don't care. But I think the movie, I think that's where people got a little bit culturally sour on the Transformers, is the death of Optimus Prime, because people saw that clearly was, we're going to get rid of this character so you can buy this other character. And for a lot of people, I have a hard time believing this, taking this literally, but I've heard the criticism that some kids looked at Optimus Prime as a father figure. That seems a little over the top to me, but nevertheless, a beloved figure that they got rid of, and then I think that brought in a lot of cynicism even to the little boy community that we were a part of. And so it didn't do them many favors. It was a strategic blunder, and probably as good as the movie might have actually been, I think that was really kind of the death knell. Now, you can argue that all this stuff cycles anyway, so maybe that was inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that some of the feedback on that movie is that killing Prime was a tactical error.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think that was, and I know we're going a little far afield here, but you do stuff on Transformers, and I loved your series on the cards. I absolutely did because there were
Yeah.
characters in there, of course, I recognized, but I didn't see because they came after the movie. And like I
Yeah.
said, I got really turned off with, plus, I was hitting junior high, and there were many other things I'd rather do at that point in time. Than watch cartoons. But at the same token, I may have still been interested had they not killed off one of the main characters, and they really didn't do it the right way. And of course, in that same movie, they kill off Megatron. So,
Right.
and so you have Galvatron. So there's this whole thing that, and I get what they were trying for, to your point. I think they were
Right.
trying to transition and probably transition into a whole new toy line.
Right.
And that was kind of the way they were headed. And I think, of course, the first live action movie was actually good. And after that, you hit Bumblebee, I don't want to hear anything out of it because it was just Michael Bay, unfortunately, didn't do it the right way, except in the first movie. And did you ever see the first live action movie?
I did. It's been a long time, but I so I didn't particularly care for it. I can't say well, I'll just say this. Bumblebee to me will always be a lovable VW bug. I had a VW, or my dad had a VW bug. It wasn't yellow, it was gray. But a couple of things about it. So number one, like I'm a to me that's Bumblebee. He's not a Camaro. He's a VW bug, which is more fitting of his actual character, which is this like pint-sized guy that's like a scout or whatever. He wasn't like a warrior, you know what I mean? He wanted to be a warrior. He wasn't a
Yeah.
warrior. And so that was the charm to me of that character. But also as a kid, like growing up, I grew up in a middle class family, and I have no complaints about that. But I wasn't the kid on the block that had every other toy. As of course we know looking back, that's probably like the best thing that could have happened, right? But at the time as a kid, it's like you're limited on what you can get, and all you can see is a world where I want this, but you can't get it. But what could you get? Mini Autobots. Like they were purposefully designed as kind of this entry level. And I think the first one I ever had was not Bumblebee, but kind of a similar mold, which was Cliff Jumper. It was like a red version
Mm-hmm.
of Bumblebee, a different car, but And so there's all sorts of psychological connections to the Bumblebee character being attainable as a toy, being kind of the VW bug, which again I had one in our family. So when they decide to make it a Camaro, and then also I like the fact that they look like people, when they're in their robot form, and the Bayformers made them look something different. I just couldn't buy into that based on my past experiences.
Yeah, I think you definitely had to shift. And I was more
Yeah.
impressed with the actual just mechanics of how they did it. The animation and how they actually
Mhm.
made that work. I would suggest probably the best of any of all the Transformers live action movies is Bumblebee.
Okay.
Because if you want to see him in the bug form, that's the movie.
Well, I
So
didn't okay, that's I did not know that. So that's okay,
yeah,
maybe I will.
you should watch that and let me know what you think. It's an endearing movie. It's fun. That's why I enjoyed the first Transformers movie and none of the rest, because they became too serious.
Mm,
They completely did what you mentioned, Optimus Prime. I don't think father figure's quite the right
right.
tone. I agree with you there, but I would say that when it comes to kind of a role model, I think, because
Mhm,
Prime always saw the positive in even Megatron, so that I think is something you just don't see. And as a kid, you could see that Prime was always trying to be positive and trying to be, now early series, not so much, but he grew into that. And in the movies, he became ruthless the
mm,
further along in the series of the movies you got. And I just, come on now, guys, let's not go too far afield on all of this. So yeah, but yeah, you should check out Bumblebee, because
Okay.
that was my biggest complaint with the original Transformers live action movie, was that he was a Camaro, which I both thought was really cool, but they were also trying to sell the new body style of the Camaro at the time. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm nothing against Camaros. That's for sure. It's just not for Bumblebee.
all right, well, that was a fun tangent.
All right.
I have been dying to ask you that question since you
I
dropped the
know.
truth bomb
I know
in
you've
the
mentioned that.
card review that you'd never seen the movie. I was like, I have got to get Jeff on camera answering why he.
And now you
But I
know.
completely understand. You either wanted to go see it or you didn't. And seeing it live the first time was definitely a shock to the system. I'll tell you that. We've talked about why you started the channel. We talked about how it became more and more work for what you were trying to do. But what was the actual, I know you explained it in your video, but what was the actual tipping points? What was the thing that you said, you know what, I'm done. I've done what I needed to do. And getting back to that vision, what kind of, this is time, I'm done, I'm giving this up. And did you accomplish what you set out to do with the channel in the first place?
Yeah. Well, again, to kind of take that in reverse order, in some ways, I never had a master plan in terms of what I wanted to do. It was always kind of like, let's throw this against the wall and see what sticks type thing. And then over time, I started to develop some goals for the channel, around the number of subscribers and the number of views. Probably about a year out, most people I didn't tell that the channel was going to close. I just didn't. I don't know why. I didn't want it. I didn't want that to be out, that I was considering it. I think because I still wanted people to watch the channel, and maybe I worried that if the word got out, people would start checking out early. You know what I mean? So anyway, the first time I had a conversation with anyone, oddly, coincidentally, with Vlad, and he lives on the East Coast, but he actually came over and we did kind of a collaboration because he was coming to a wedding on the West Coast here in the Bay Area. And so at the end of that, I kind of mentioned to him, like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm starting to see that, that you got the fun, you got the work, and originally it's like this, right? That I could start to feel it, kind of come around. And, he was like, oh, no, you got to keep going. I was like, okay. And that's what other people would say to me too. Just people like coworkers would say that to me. And just over time, it just became clear to me. It's like, what am I doing? What am I getting out of this? And I'd made the decision um, to go ahead and give it another year, and I would wrap things up. So I would, kind of enjoy it, do one more cycle, if you will, and then kind of close things up. So I wouldn't have any regrets because there's this huge goodbye, basically, and no one knew it except me. But and I would try different things. I got a little more experimental, particularly in the first half of the year where things are slow, in terms of products coming out, with putting stuff out. But any time during that period, I could have changed my mind, right? I didn't, and it just became more and more obvious. In some ways, it was hard to even go as long as I did, because I'm kind of like, okay, let's wrap it up, and then I would have to, my professionalism would kick in. And I go, no, you got to give it 100%. Don't, just, because I was going toward these goals. That's kind of what helped kind of keep me going. And why the goals were they're just arbitrary numbers I'd made up. Like, there's nothing to them. And no one cares but me, I will say this, though. I did at the end get together a commemorative Swiss Army knife with my subscribers at the time, anyway, and the number of views I had. Those are my two main goals. So this is kind of a cool commemorative thing I put together. Got my name on my
That's really
YouTube
cool.
channel on it. So anyway, just sharing that for fun. Yeah, and I gotta tell you, like, so at no point during the year did I go, wait, what am I doing? I can't stop now. I got to keep it going. It was more I had to convince myself to keep going. And since I've closed the channel, and it's been almost 3 months now, I've moved on completely. In fact, you might know in that last video, I had a picture of my drawer of devices. There's over 25 devices in there. Those are all have all been wiped, factory reset, and charged. And I've got a community garage sale that's going to take place in May, and I'm just going to give them away to people. So I'm just ready to let all of that go. I haven't answered any questions on my channel since I closed it. I feel a little bit bad about that because I know, I like to help people, but I just can't do it anymore. I'm just done. So yeah, I don't know what else to say other than that. I feel like there was nothing more to accomplish, that I did what I set out to do. I'm glad I did it. No regrets about doing it. I had a great time, but it's over.
And, one thing you didn't mention that I think is really important, at least for me, is that when you started this whole journey, it's because you couldn't actually go and test these products other than the Remarkable, which you could go into Best Buy and you could ride on a Remarkable. And at the time, you could go in and, at the time you left at least, and currently, the Kindle Scribe
Mhm.
was something you could actually buy somewhere other than online. And I think that's one reason that these channels are still kind of popular, because people are trying to make a decision and there's so little information. And you have been gone a couple of months, but the flood of AI reviews or the paid like million follower people who are, content creators, which there's nothing wrong with that. But you can tell they've never held an e-ink device in their lives, and now they're doing the newest Remarkable or the newest Kindle or, iFlyTech or whoever it is. They've never used a device or seen it or know anything about it other than the spec sheet and the press kit. And again, I'm glad the awareness is there, and I fault nobody for doing a review as long as they tag it as sponsored if they're being paid to do so. But it's changed in that the having the smaller creators, I mean, because even Voya, as big as he is in this space, is not a huge content creator.
The
Same with
Correct,
Kit.
yes. Right,
We're not big time influencers, any of us.
right.
And I think that was something that got you into it, got me into it, got a lot of people thinking about, I don't know that I only started this because I was trying to make a decision, and had it not been for Voya and Kit, and I don't think I had seen you until after I started, but it was like, I don't know what to buy because
Yeah.
I can't go and look at this.
Yeah. No,
So
I mean, that was a so part when I started, there were not a lot of voices in the space at all. The influencers, the more paid influencers, if you will, didn't care because it wasn't big enough. And then in terms of our level of people that were kind of passionate about it, there just weren't that many people. And that changed from the beginning to the end, where there's still a lot of voices. Like your channel's still there, Vlad's channel's still there, Rod still has a channel, still have Voya and Kit. There's a couple other folk. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be offensive by not mentioning them. I can't remember the names, but there's still there's plenty of voices out there that are legit, that are reviewers, that you can kind of get a bead on what their bias is, and then just kind of go from there. Who are consistent, I think, in their reviews, and regardless of how they get their devices, which I know is somewhat controversial, but shouldn't be. Do coverage of devices that are helpful to people that are trying to make a purchase decision. Also, the other thing too, though, like one of the interesting things is I think what you're saying is right, and I've talked about that in my video, which is it's hard to go out and actually get hands-on with the device, which is a real bummer, because a lot of them are really amazing, and I think it would still even be more popular if that was true. But I also think that just the same is that there are, depending on how you want to count it, 4 or 5 major manufacturers of devices, and they're all great. And the only question you have to ask is, what are you looking for? Like an Amazon Kindle, if you're looking for something where you want to write along with your reading, and it's okay if it's kind of a basic writing experience, is great. Remarkable does, fairly basic experience, but has a lot of cool features, not as feature packed as others, but really competent at the things they choose to focus on, is great. Supernote, great, for all the complexity they bring to the table, but it doesn't feel like it's super, you don't get overwhelmed like you would say with a Books device. Books is great. They offer all sorts of great features, and they're competent. I like Viwoods, as we've mentioned. I think they're great too. In a lot of ways, going back to the Go generation 2, I don't need to see them. I already know them based on the years that I've done reviews. And I think as a viewer, you kind of know them too, as if you've been following along. Or um so I think the need is a little bit less than it was when I started. Like, again,
Mhm.
without Voya, I would never have heard of Supernote and would never have trusted Supernote. And so that was an essential bridge to getting me on board. I don't know that that's the same. Of course, I'm speaking for other people, so maybe I'm kind of talking out of turn here, but I don't think it's quite like it was, and that's in a good way. Like, I think the products are more well known, and we've seen stability in terms of the different players. We know Big Me is terrible, for example. I know I'm probably pissing off some people by saying that, but they are. They had a lot of promise, but they never delivered. And anyway, yeah, we could talk forever about that. But so yeah, the world changed, man. It changed from when I started to when I ended. But some of that is ancillary to why I stopped. I think that it was just time. I just ran out of energy and passion for those types of reviews.
One thing I want to pull on, and then I want to find out what you're doing now. But you mentioned, how people get devices. And I do want to ask you this, and I want your unfiltered opinion on this because I think that is controversial. And I think I have always been of the opinion that if you get a device and you are not given a script to follow and not paid for that content, you are receiving a device. So you are receiving something for free. But at the same time, if there are no requirements other than talk about it, is that worse? Because there
Mhm.
is a lot of controversy around people who get devices for free. And of course,
Uh-huh.
I didn't forever. And then I started to get them. And
Yeah.
I never thought it was a conflict, but a lot of people think it is. A lot of people think if you get the device for free, then you're beholden to the company to give a good review. And I personally don't see it that way. But
Well, you and I were both involved in a exchange, which I kind of regret a little bit, just from the perspective of this ties back earlier to posting. When you're doing some negative comments, it's like, why did I post that? We were kind of engaging with someone who had a pretty strict ideology, and the ideology was, you are, to your point, that some people think you're fundamentally biased if you receive a device for free. And obviously we disagreed with that. I had someone early in the early days, and I don't remember the name, unfortunately, but they posted on my channel, and this is what they said: "I really love your content. I hope you do really well. At some point, companies are going to ask you to review, are going to give you devices to review for free, and you just tell us that that's the case, and you're good." And that stuck with me. Uh, and basically he was saying is, look, he was of our mindset. I'm assuming it's he, which is that as long as we disclose it, the viewer can decide whether there's undue bias involved or not. But our job is just to say, this is how we got it. And I did that. I followed FTC guidelines on that, which most channels don't do, which is, not only did I say it in my videos, in any video I talked about that product, but I would also put the text on the screen. Disclaimer, this device was given to me by whatever company. And then I just did what I did. I think that I understand the perspective of what I would call purists, of saying, look, if you get a device, then we'll say, compromised, for lack of a better term. I just don't think it's realistic. I lost a ton of money on the channel. And I knew what I was getting into, no regrets about doing that. But is that realistic? What's more realistic is people would do channels and be able to get devices, without having to pay for them, whether it's a review copy or they get to keep it, it doesn't really matter. And then that's how that thing proceeds accordingly. As I mentioned, companies have different ways of manipulating the perception of their devices, right? And the control of the narrative around that. And usually it's through selection. So they're going to determine people that are generally going to be positive, and then they'll just roll the dice and see, how that goes. But I don't think the act itself of giving a device, particularly when disclosed, is an actual, I don't know. I think pragmatically it's fine. So early on, Kit had a lot of devices given to him, and he would say that. And I always felt, back to the consistency thing, I knew exactly where his Kit was coming from device to device. And having some of the devices myself, I never had a single issue with anything he reviewed. Sometimes we disagree, but I never saw any evidence of actual bias in his reviews from having gotten a device. So I think I get the conceptual argument there, but I think in practice it's not there. It's fine. And in practical terms, that's just that's the world we live in.
Yeah, and I also have this, just to follow up on that a little bit. So for like me, and any money I've ever gotten out of this channel has gone into upgrading cameras. Like you mentioned, this isn't cheap. I've never made a profit yet. Everything has kept me stable. It's either software or it's the little bit of hardware, because I never went ZV1. I mean, I've got all webcams. I keep it as cheap as I can because I realize, and I tell people that if I had to buy devices, you wouldn't get the content because I can't. I've bought one device in my entire career, and that's the Supernote A5X, which I still have and absolutely love and still chugs along just fine, because I try to put myself in the place of the consumer, that most people, we're in a place of privilege. I mean, either we can afford to buy devices because we're taking some of that income and we're buying them, or we are being given devices as review units to be able to bring that to people. Most people are going to buy one device.
Mhm.
And I think that is the mindset I always try to keep, is that I'm showing you all of these devices. I may show you how two of them work together, but I really don't expect you to buy both of these,
Right.
unless that's in your workflow or it's a need or you are financially in a place where you can. But I want you to be comfortable enough to be able to buy one of them and feel good about that decision. And I always felt your videos were very much in that same vein. It wasn't about the whole ecosystem and, how do all 20 devices sync. You would mention that, but it was always about making someone feel like I could buy this device and have it be my device and I would be good.
I can tell you a
So,
story about that too. I think that's totally right. And I don't think I said this in my last video. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but so I had used these devices at work, and there was one day where someone at work had ended up buying the original Kindle Scribe, inspired partly by the fact that I was, at the time using the Supernote. And I remember my initial, he showed it, he was beaming, he was so happy about it. And internally, I was thinking, that's not the device I would have bought. And I remember after having that thought thinking, wait, hold on. That guy got the device that was great for him and he loves it. Like that's the end game. That's what you want. You want people to get what they want. It doesn't matter that I don't like that device. Who cares what I like? So and that was really kind of, I never said anything to him about it. Thank God. I kept my mouth still because that was the right thing to do. He had a device. It worked for him. It's great. Awesome. Love it. And so yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying.
okay. So what are you doing now? I mean, I know how much time it takes to do this. And, what are you doing now? What is next for the great Jeffrey Moss? You've got to have some kind of project going, or are you just busy enough with life and travel, or what do you got going on right now?
Okay, so I don't know who this great Jeffrey Moss is, but I can talk about myself. So it was all encompassing to do the channel. That's another reason why I think it kind of came to a close, which is there was not a day that I didn't spend time thinking or working on the channel. Like, so that's it was work, sleep, and thinking about the channel. Those were the top three. And then the family kind of came back, was fourth. So I've spent a lot of time over the last 3 months taking care of things I should have taken care of over the previous 2.5 years, like health things. I just got my shingles shot this past weekend. My arm is crazy sore right now. It's something I kind of put a lot of things on pause, because my focus was entirely on the channel. There's a bunch of house stuff, a honey-do list, if you will, that I'm finally getting to and focusing on. It's not that I completely disregarded these things during the last 2.5 years of the channel, but I de-emphasized them for sure. So there's been a lot of catch up. I've been meeting with friends that I haven't met with maybe even since COVID, over this last couple months. So that's what I've been doing. And then I've been really lazy. I've been super lazy outside of that. Like I just haven't, I finally started getting back into reading. That's just recently. I haven't been reading for the most part. So that's been great. And there are some things I want to do kind of artistically. I'm right now kind of thinking about some ideas I have for maybe science fiction short stories that are kind of somewhat reflective of our society now. And so I'm just thinking about what those concepts are, and then I'll build a story around those. So I'm just starting that process. There was a fantasy novel I'd written a rough draft of before I started my channel. So I'd finished that rough draft, and then I didn't work on it at all. So at some point I might do the editing on that and get back to it. I might I like AI. I enjoy, the fact that you can create things that you couldn't create before. So I might use AI to help with the editing process, or I might create illustrations using AI. I even kind of have this idea, it's very conceptual, so it probably won't happen. I have this idea of doing a podcast where I script it, but then have AI actors act it out and then kind of publish that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. But for the most part, just to be clear, I've been super lazy since I ended the channel. And I'm unapologetically so. I've been enjoying life these past 3 months.
No, that's absolutely great. And I mean, I'm glad that you're finding joy in that. And I think sometimes just in life it's nice to take a step back and to reevaluate where we're at and what we're doing. And sometimes we can get so busy that we just miss the small things, the little things, the things we want to do. I wish you all the best. Thank you for being first time back on YouTube on my channel. I appreciate that. We just hit past 4,000 subscribers, so we're moving along, and we're gaining some steam, branching out a little bit, doing a few different things here and there, just trying to see what's new, and excited about all the new things on the market. But Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here. You've been a good friend. I really hope we stay in touch. I look forward to your Bumblebee review.
Okay. All
And
right. A lot of pressure.
and we will talk to you soon, everybody. You all keep moving forward and have a great rest of your day.
Ed, it's been a pleasure.